6. Vintage car graveyard. There's a vintage car graveyard found in western Germany, situated near the city of Dusseldorf in a forest. There's exactly 50 classic cars here, no more, no less. The graveyard's inventory includes beauties like a 1950s Willys M38 Jeep, a classic Jaguar XK120, a vintage Rolls-Royce Silver Dawn, and many more. But cars aren't the only thing you'll find here. Interestingly, there's a piece of the famous Berlin Wall, and even a British K6 phone booth from the 1950s. Among the dilapidated remains of this junkyard, there's a plane with a recognizable paint job. It looks like it has a shark face, and is similar to the planes used by the Flying Tigers between 1941 and 1942. Judging by the perfect condition of its propellers though, the plane has likely never flown before. What's strange about this place is that even though the cars and vehicles seem like they've been completely abandoned in the forest, someone does actually own them. Everything in this vehicle graveyard belongs to none other than Michael Frolik, an automobile expert and a classic car lover. He owns the land where the vehicles are parked, and he deliberately left them in the woods at the hands of Mother Nature. Frolik is a former philosopher, artist, fashion designer, and racer, but these days he's known for being a skilled restorer and car dealer. While Frolik could be driving around in an expensive, luxurious vehicle if he wanted, he chooses to use a charred Rolls-Royce that was almost incinerated when his dealership burned to the ground back in 2005. The enthusiast has written multiple reference books, and he's also traveled around the world looking for unique vehicles to add to his growing collection. He calls his graveyard, located in the Neander Valley, his auto sculpture park. His museum is surrounded by a high-security fence, and it's in a wooded hillside right next to Frolik's home. All 50 cars from his collection, as well as the plane, were moved in the year 2000, when Frolik turned 50 years old. And, interestingly enough, every vehicle he owns was made in 1950, the same year he was born. Many of them were operating when they were parked in the woods, but will likely never be driven again. Frolik spoke with Spiegel International in 2009 and said, "They're like my brothers," while speaking about the cars. He explained that nature is stronger than technology, and he wanted to showcase this idea in his personal vehicle museum. Car fans, TV crews, and photographers were invited to the park's opening, but the place has rarely let the public in since. Apparently, the only way to get access to the museum is by contacting Frolik himself and requesting a visit. Every vehicle on the property has a unique and interesting story about its past and how it was discovered, and Frolik can tell you everything you want to know. If this seems like somewhere you'd like to explore one day, he could even be your personal tour guide. You just have to get on the man's good side first. 5. 100-year-old ship. In 2019, Tom Fisher and his son Ross found a 100-year-old buried ship on their 17-acre property in Nash County, North Carolina. The Fishers found the wooden boat buried in the mud after a drought exposed it. The ship was 94 feet long, and they found out that it was once called the Robinson Gold Dredge. The vessel was used during the gold rush in the early 1900s in the eastern half of the state, but the boat was later abandoned. Since making the shocking discovery, Tim and Ross have continued to dig around the same area and have uncovered some interesting artifacts. The father-son duo gathered a dedicated group of friends who've worked with the EPA and state to carefully dig and expose the site, discovering treasure along the way. According to Tim, there was fine gold found inside the ship. It was in an area where the deck used to be before rotting away. The crew also uncovered a perfectly intact mason jar with a silver spoon inside. The Fishers are now planning to preserve the artifacts they find in a small on-site museum. They also want to rebuild the 2-story ship that was once buried in the mud. Tim explained to ABC 11 how they'd welcome visitors who want to see the boat, but in the near future they plan to expand things to make it more public. Ross Fisher opened the NC Treasure Hunters campground in the same area the ship was found, and he even has a dedicated Facebook page for it. On a pinned post, prices are listed for all the fun activities they offer at their campgrounds. If you ever decide to visit this unique place in the middle of North Carolina, you can choose from activities like gold panning or searching for fossils, all for a small fee, of course. 4. Kununu Vuori Ghost Town. One of Helsinki, Finland's best-kept secrets is Kununu Vuori, a spooky ghost town out in the woods that's full of abandoned villas and the burnt remains of old seasonal homes for wealthy vacationers. The town has been forgotten about for decades, and its dilapidated villas have been left to stand Mother Nature's mercy. Situated about 2 miles from the city's center, the collection of abandoned vacation homes continue to struggle against time and the elements as years pass by. Kununu Vuori was first founded in the late 19th century when eastern Helsinki was just forests and fields. The breathtaking coastline and lush greenery made the town a paradise. And in 1900, Albert Goldbeck Lowen, a German businessman, bought the land. Albert then developed a resort for wealthy Germans and the upper class who lived nearby at the time. But soon, Kununu Vuori became available to hard-working middle-class citizens as well. As part of the armistice between the Soviet Union and Germany, Kununu Vuori fell to Finland's Communist Party shortly after World War II. For a little while, it became a holiday resort for party members. Then, in 1955, R.J. Aarnio was given full ownership of the area, and he had the bright idea to turn the place into a residential space capable of housing thousands of people. But the villas that were already on the land still belonged to their former owners. The community remained active and vibrant for a time, but then a feeling of dread and uncertainty started to fill the town. Buildings were neglected and proper maintenance was no longer taken care of. Apparently, Aarnio's construction plans were paused by zoning laws, and their negative successive building permit drove him to lose interest in the project entirely. Over time, people left Kununu Vuori, and silently the town on the mountain began to disappear from memory. These days, you can still find most of the old structures in the Helsinki forest. All the villas and buildings are exactly where they used to be, only now they're covered in dust and debris, and have started to deteriorate. Many of the buildings have graffiti on them, and it looks as though the homes have been ransacked. Not much is left inside the abandoned villas, only outdated furniture and old wood-burning fireplaces that likely haven't been used since the 1970s. Would you ever visit a ghost town in the woods? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 3. Shaker rock piles. Several impressive rock piles litter the forest surrounding Shaker Village in Canterbury, New Hampshire. According to Marshall Hudson with New Hampshire magazine, the piles predate motorized equipment. The stones were stacked together perfectly somehow, likely by a skilled stonemason. Some of the piles are shaped like haystacks, while others look like giant meatballs. Many of the rocks here are way too heavy for any one person to have moved alone, so it's possible that a small group of people worked together. The labor must have been absolutely exhausting, so whatever they were doing it for had to have been important. Luckily, thanks to old records kept at Shaker Village, the true story behind these piles has been revealed. A former soldier named Peter Ayers embraced the Shaker faith in 1787, and he entered the New York Mount Lebanon Shaker Society. He lived there until 1792, when he was sent to New Hampshire to organize a group at Canterbury. He took on a few different roles while there, including hatmaker and schoolteacher. Ayers also operated water-powered mills, built dams, and raised a variety of livestock. But by 1818, the new Shaker community's mills were up and running, and Ayers found himself with a lot more time on his hands. Now, back to the mysterious rock piles. According to some of Ayers' personal journals, the man suffered from PTSD, although this condition was not well recognized in his time. He served as a soldier back in the 1900s, so who knows what he might have seen. While building the stone piles was partly for agricultural purposes, as Ayers was clearing an isolated spot of ground, it was also a way for him to cope with his many inner demons. The physical exertion of stacking stones, along with Ayers' isolation and the sense of accomplishment he felt while looking at his giant stone heaps, kept the man's bad thoughts at bay. Shakers were not allowed to marry or have any children, and everyone that belongs to the faith chooses a life of celibacy. So it makes sense that Ayers would try and find something to do with all that free time. In this case, he chose to stack hundreds of rocks together in order to create giant stone piles. Wouldn't be our first option, but hey, whatever floats his boat. 2. Creepy dolls. Imagine going for a calm walk in the woods only to find multiple baby dolls tied to trees, like out of a horror movie. This exact situation happened to a 64-year-old woman from England in January 2021. The woman isn't named in the story, but she made the frightening discovery while exploring an area around Cannock Chase in Staffordshire, England. She was walking through the undergrowth when she came to a sudden clearing where several trees stood with baby dolls on them. Some were nailed and some were tied up. The woman spoke with Black Country Live and described the scene. She explained that the dolls were situated in a very specific order, and some of them were bare, while others wore strange, green, raggedy clothes. The woman, who's a theatre practitioner at Walsall Manor Hospital, claimed that she saw a sign while coming out of the woods that said the area was once the operating theatre for the Old Ministry Pensions Hospital. The facility closed its doors during the late 1920s, and after that, all the buildings were bought by the owners of a nearby coal mine in order to house miners and their families. The site was called Brindley Village, and it even had a school and functioning men's club. The residents of the town would then move to the outskirts of Hednesford in the early 1950s, where a new housing estate was created. The woman had no idea who put the baby dolls on the trees, but she didn't feel any negative energy coming from them while she was there. She even returned to the site later on and said her prayers, wishing all the children who once lived in the village eternal rest. 1. Crashed plane hike. In North Carolina, there's a hike that leads you straight to an old plane crash. The aircraft apparently crashed in 1983 and has been there ever since. Spanning 469 miles, the Blue Ridge Parkway offers a long list of outdoor adventures, including stunning views, a handful of hiking trails, and visitor centers. There's very few crash sites in North Carolina, but one of them is found deep on this trail running beside a ridge. Oddly enough, you can make a whole day trip out of visiting the abandoned aircraft, but getting to the plane is no simple task. There's 3 trails in total that you have to follow in order to get to the wreck site. It's also recommended that you travel with a buddy, since it's so easy for someone to get lost in these woods. There's many steep drops and difficult terrain along the way too. On the night of November 24, 1983, the plane was traveling to Silver when it ran into some undefined precipitation with low-lying cloud cover. Just before 6 p.m., the aircraft crashed into the remote North Carolina woods, killing both passengers on board. Unfortunately, the plane went down about 11 miles from its intended destination. It was a Cessna 414A, a small plane with 3 wheels and a pointed nose. Due to the rough terrain in the region, the engines were the only things that were salvageable from the wreckage, and the rest of the aircraft was left to decay on the mountainside.
Number 9. Fulwolf 190. In recent years, this photo of a crashed World War II-era Fulwolf 190 fighter jet has circulated online. Nobody seems to know where or when the picture was taken, or the actual story behind the crash. According to one Redditor, the photo was taken somewhere in France in 1944, but the user admitted that the details about the image were sketchy. Regardless of the specifics, it wasn't the first or only Fulwolf 190 wreck to be discovered in the woods. In 1991, an outdoorsman came across one of the downed aircraft while hunting in a Soviet forest. He notified the authorities, and after doing some digging, officials concluded that the German-made aircraft crashed in 1943 after taking off from a nearby airport. The pilot, Major Paul Radl, was heading toward the front lines just a 15-minute flight away when the plane was attacked by Soviet anti-aircraft artillery. Its fuel supply system was completely destroyed. Major Radl tried to fly back to the airport, but he crash-landed in the woods and was captured by the Soviet army. He remained a prisoner until 1949, 5 years after the war ended. By the time the downed aircraft was found in 1991, its machine gun had been removed. This may have been done as part of a failed effort by the German military to recover the plane. Shortly after its rediscovery, the fighter jet was removed and taken to a nearby Soviet military base. At the time, the USSR was under immense economic strain and was just months away from collapsing. Lacking the resources to do anything with the plane, the government sold it to the British Aviation Collection. It was eventually restored, and in 2010, the aircraft finally flew again for the first time in 67 years. Number 8. Double Devastation. On November 14, 1970, the Marshall University Thundering Herd football team and coaching staff boarded a chartered DC-9 and headed back to West Virginia from North Carolina. The team had just lost their football game to East Carolina University. Tragically, the plane crashed in a wooded area while trying to land at Tri-State Airport in Canova, killing all 75 players, boosters, and staff members aboard. Just a day later, the wreckage was plowed away by bulldozers. The crash and its harrowing aftermath were depicted in the 2006 movie We Are Marshall. While the plane itself is no longer there, the site is marked by a plaque memorializing the lives lost. The Marshall crash came on the heels of an eerily similar tragedy that happened just a month earlier in Silver Plume, Colorado. 2 Martin 404 airplanes departed from Kansas with Wichita State University football players, boosters, and coaches for a game in Utah, with no plans to refuel in Denver. Sadly, one of the planes crashed into a mountain in the Arapahoe National Forest because it was overweight and the pilot was unable to pull it out of a canyon after opting to take the scenic route. 29 of the 40 people aboard died at the scene, and 2 perished later on. Like the Marshall wreck, there's a memorial plaque near the crash site. Number 7. Retired Olympic Airways 727 jet. In the forest of rural Hillsboro, Oregon, there's a Boeing 77 jet that once flew for the Greek airline Olympic Airways. At first glance, it looks like it was parked there and abandoned for some unknown reason. The aircraft's exterior is noticeably old and worn out, as if it was left at the mercy of nature and forgotten about. But it's actually the home of a retired engineer named Bruce Campbell, who paid $100,000 for the plane in 1999 after it was retired from commercial service. He paid another $120,000 to have it flown from Athens, Greece to Portland. Then he removed the wings and had the fuselage towed to an abandoned walnut orchard on a 10-acre property that he purchased for $23,000. Campbell reattached the wings and proceeded to turn the 727 into his permanent living quarters. He uses the rear staircase as the main entrance, and he never split the interior up into separate rooms, but he did remove some of the seats to make space for his own furniture and belongings. The engines are also gone, but the aircraft sits along a major fault line, so he left the landing gear in place to protect it in the event of an earthquake. Speaking with Bottom Line blogger Bill Briggs, Campbell explained that airplanes function as flying homes, but they can serve the same purpose just fine on the ground. They're equipped with everything a person needs as far as modern conveniences like lighting, plumbing, and climate control go. He saw no reason to create separate rooms or make any other major changes to the interior. In fact, Campbell believes that retired aircraft could be repurposed as affordable housing, despite the pretty penny he paid to set up his 727 as a home. He spends half of the year living in the aircraft in Oregon and the other half in Japan, where tsunamis, earthquakes, and other natural disasters have made thousands of people homeless on a moment's notice at various points throughout history. Speaking to Oregon Live, the eccentric engineer pointed out that 3 commercial aircraft are retired daily on average, and he wondered out loud why they end up being scrapped or abandoned when they could easily function as someone's home. Would you live on a retired aircraft? Why or why not? Let me know in the comments below. Number 6. BAC 111. Designed during the early 1960s, the British Aircraft Corporation 111 was a solid model that remained in use among major airlines into the 1990s, but it's no longer considered airworthy in most countries, and the last flyable one was taken out of service in 2019, which means that your chances of stumbling upon one are slim unless you happen to be exploring the forest northwest of Chicago. If you look hard enough, you may find an old BAC 111 sitting in these woods. Featuring 3 distinctive reddish-orange lines along its fuselage, the small white jet was built in 1965. It flew for Pacific Airlines starting in 1977 and was put into storage in 1998 under the ownership of Rotec Industries. A YouTuber who shared footage of the plane declined to reveal its exact location, most likely to protect it from vandalism. Local radio station 100.9 The Eagle speculated that the wreck is in Gilbert's or Elmhurst, Illinois. The aircraft looks as though its wings were cut off to simplify its journey into the woods, suggesting that it may have been put there on purpose. but the story behind why and how it ended up there is a mystery. Number 5. P40YSA. Tucked away in the jungle on the Dutch Caribbean island of Curaçao is a weathered and overgrown plane reminiscent of a scene from Indiana Jones or the TV series Lost. The aircraft has clearly been there for a number of years, but nobody seems to know exactly how it got there. It was identified as a twin turboprop built by the Japanese manufacturer Nihon Aircraft, which flew under Aruba Airlines as Flight P4YSA. There are no known records of the plane's most recent owner or what happened to it after it came to a rest at the remote site. It's also unclear whether the aircraft wrecked or if someone parked it there on purpose. The plane's wings, seats, and turboprops have been removed. At one point, there was reportedly plans to turn it into a restaurant, but this never happened. P4YSA was one of two of its particular model that Aruba Airlines bought in 1986, with the other being classified as Flight P4YSB. While Flight YSA ended up in the Caribbean jungle for unknown reasons, YSB's fate is much more traceable. It was submerged as an artificial reef off the Aruban coast after being irreparably damaged during Hurricane Lenny in 1999 and remains there to this day. The plane sits 40 feet beneath the waves off the coast of Aruba and isn't too far from its twin, despite meeting a much different end. Number 4. Lockheed C130 Hercules. On July 4, 2021, a Lockheed C130 Hercules took off from the Philippine city of Cagayan de Oro with 104 members of the country's Air Force and 5 military vehicles on board. After overshooting the runway at Jolo Airport in the province of Sulu, the plane crashed into a wooded area nearby, killing 46 of the plane's occupants and 3 civilians on the ground. It was the Philippine Air Force's deadliest aviation accident of all time, and the country's worst military air disaster in 30 years. Most of the people on the plane were recent military graduates who were on their way to participate in counterinsurgency operations. Some of them could be seen jumping out of the aircraft before it hit the ground and burst into flames. It's unclear whether the fateful decision spared them from the deadly blaze or cost them their lives. Nearby civilians sprang into action to help with the rescue and recovery effort. Photos of the wreck showed the C-130 in pieces and engulfed in flames as thick black smoke rose above the surrounding coconut palms. An investigation failed to attribute one single factor to the crash. The C-130 was in good condition when it took off that day, and the military ruled out the possibility of an attack being responsible. A report concluded that the accident most likely resulted from human error that may have been influenced by local and environmental conditions. Number 3. Cessna 172. In 2015, a photo of a Cessna 172 plane was featured in a news article about a crashed plane that was found in western Romania with no pilot in sight. The bizarre incident happened in Vaslui County. It's unclear whether the pilot was ever found. But the photo that appeared in the piece was actually from a crash that happened in Watertown, Connecticut in 2014. The pilot, 54-year-old Daniel Kropas, survived without any major injuries, and unlike in the incident in Romania, he was found at the scene. He was flying from Danbury to Plymouth, Connecticut, when he lost control of the single-engine aircraft and crashed in a wooded section of someone's backyard, narrowly missing some power lines during his unplanned descent to the ground. And while the pilot was extremely lucky to walk away from the wreck practically unharmed, the plane sustained some serious damage after landing nose first among the thicket of trees. At the time the story broke, the Federal Aviation Administration was investigating the incident. Local resident John Moskalik, who witnessed the crash, told NBC Connecticut that Kropas appeared distressed after weaving in and out of the power lines. It's understandable considering how much different and deadlier the outcome would have been if he had struck the cables. Number 2. Lockheed P38 Lightning. While flying over a forest near Waldeck, Austria on July 8, 1944, 23-year-old Second Lieutenant Henry Donald Mitchell vanished along with the P-38 aircraft he was piloting, leaving his family to wonder for years what had happened to him. The crash site was discovered on private property in 2017, but the landowner refused to allow authorities to excavate, and the investigation was put on hold. American and Austrian diplomats worked together in an effort to resolve the dispute with the landowner, but they failed to gain access to the site until the man passed away and left his property to his son, who was more open-minded to the excavation. Finally, in 2021, the U.S. POW MIA department got a chance to investigate the wreck. They confirmed the plane's identity and found human remains which they believe belonged to Donald Mitchell. The agency sent Mitchell's brother Bob an email to inform him of the discovery while they waited for the bones to be identified. A forensic anthropologist confirmed that the remains belonged to Donald Mitchell, finally bringing his family's decades-long search to an end. For a long time, Bob didn't believe that Donald went down with the plane, especially since the pilot's fellow soldiers didn't see the crash. It left Bob wondering if Donald had somehow survived and perhaps been taken as a prisoner of war. Now that his brother's remains have been found, he no longer has to live without answers. And at number 1, B-24 Liberator Beautiful Betsy. Also known as the Model 32, the consolidated B-24 Liberator is an American heavy bomber that was used extensively throughout World War II. In fact, it's the most produced heavy bomber and multi-engine aircraft of all time. Consequently, there are also many B-24 wrecks throughout the world. One unfortunate crash happened as World War II entered its final months in early 1945 when a B-24 Liberator nicknamed Beautiful Betsy disappeared over Australia while flying from Darwin to Brisbane. 6 military members and 2 British soldiers vanished along with it. After being damaged during previous bombing missions, the plane was slated for retirement. In the meantime, it was only being used for short flights. Numerous expeditions failed to find the missing aircraft. Its fate remained a mystery until 49 years later, in 1994, when a park ranger discovered the wreck while surveying wildfire damage in Crumbit Tops National Park. The recent blaze had cleared overgrowth, exposing enough of the plane for the ranger to see it glistening in the sun. Specialists from the U.S. Army investigated the site and collected human remains. The wreck was then opened to the public and remains in place today, serving as an ever-present reminder of a once-forgotten tragedy.
5. P40 Warhawk. The United States of America started the Lend-Lease program in 1941. It was aimed at helping the Allied forces in their fight against the Germans during World War II. Between 1941 and 1945, the US supplied the Soviet Union with $11.3 billion worth of supplies, and the P40 Warhawk was just one model out of more than 14,000 airplanes that were given to the USSR. The Warhawk was an American-made single-engine fighter with a wingspan measuring 37 feet, and it had a length of 33.5 feet. It boasted 2 M2 Browning machine guns and carried up to 2,000 pounds of bombs. And during the war, Joseph Stalin's Red Army had a total of 313 of the P-40 warplanes on lease from the United States. In 2017, during the construction of the Crimean Bridge, a crew of workers were searching for old mines or unexploded ordnance when they discovered a P-40 Warhawk in the Kerch Peninsula. During World War II, the Kerch Peninsula saw some fierce fighting between the Nazis and Stalin's Red Army. The Warhawk, they found, was certainly down during one of these fierce battles. The aircraft rested in its shallow grave for over 70 years until the construction crew uncovered it. Upon being raised, it was transported to undergo renovations, and it's been reported that it'll be displayed in a military history exhibit sometime in the future. 4. Ice worm. Russian researchers collected 300 samples of soil from the Arctic in 2018. The frozen specimens, which were found in diverse places, were representative of several geological ages. Back in the lab, worms were found in some of the samples, and they were dated to be 42,000 years old. They were known as nematodes, and they'd spent over 40 millennium frozen solid inside the permafrost. The little critters were transferred to a petri dish and were left for several weeks at a temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit so they could defrost. Amazingly, the worms gradually showed signs of life. The petri dish the worms were left in contained a nutritional medium. The nematodes apparently had no idea that they'd basically been brought back from the dead after thousands of years, as they began to eat as if nothing had happened. This incredible achievement established the benchmark for successful animal cryogenic suspension. It goes without saying that this attracted the curiosity of scientists working to preserve humankind. It's surprising that Pleistocene nematodes can survive having their entire bodies frozen, especially without suffering any negative repercussions. They're shielded in some way from oxidation and ice's destructive effects. Cryomedicine and astrobiology are two medical specialities where this unknown method could be extremely helpful. 3. Liquid sulfur. The summit depth of the Daikoku volcano, which is located in the northern Mariana Islands, is approximately -1,060 feet. Given that the volcano's height is around 7,152 feet, that might not seem all that spectacular. A lake of pure molten sulfur, however, is one of the most unusual sights on Earth and can be seen inside the Daikoku volcano's crater. The only other place we know about where pure molten sulfur occurs is on one of Jupiter's moons called Io. You almost certainly can't afford the fuel to travel there, so unfortunately you're unlikely to see this event firsthand. The volcano's pit of churning black ooze, appropriately called the cauldron, burns at a scorching 369 degrees Fahrenheit. Although the white smoke that comes from one of the nearby craters hints that there may be more molten sulfur down there, we haven't yet been able to investigate it in great depth. But if more sulfur is discovered in the area, the region as a whole may simply contain the key to understanding the beginnings of life. The long-held but much disputed Gaia theory claims that the entire planet is a single, self-regulating organism where all life and non-life work together to keep it alive. By catching part of this sulfur and releasing it into the atmosphere, scientists want to determine if it can be returned to land. If so, sulfur may be the catalyst for Earth's ability to nourish and sustain life, suggesting that there might be something to the Gaia theory after all. Do you think there could be life on Jupiter's moon Io? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 2. Icebergs. When most people think about the dangers in the ocean, a shark attack is the first thing that comes to mind, or perhaps getting lost at sea. But the truth is, neither of those two examples pose a threat quite like icebergs. For thousands of years, icebergs have been around and, without question, they're one of the most striking formations in the world. An iceberg is essentially a massive floating freshwater ice that's detached from a glacier or ice shelf, and typically they're more than 16 feet wide. Some of the larger ones are bigger than cities such as Manhattan, Los Angeles, or Chicago. The famous Titanic, along with many other ships that have sunk, is unfortunate evidence that icebergs have great potential to cause danger. Though icebergs are extremely large, only about 1/10 of the formulation is visible above the water's surface, which is where part of the danger stems from. This fact alone makes it rather difficult for sea travelers to determine its size accurately. The International Ice Patrol, a company that keeps an eye on icebergs in the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, was created as a result of so many tragic accidents involving massive chunks of ice. Because of their patrols and reports, ships are now able to navigate through busy marine shipping routes and avoid potentially fatal collisions. Icebergs mostly form in the North Atlantic Ocean near Greenland, but they're also found near Antarctica in the Southern Ocean. After they break off from glaciers, ice shelves, or from a larger iceberg through a process called calving, the icebergs typically travel with the ocean's currents. They'll either end up in the ocean or they'll crash against the land where they were formed. According to the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA, the overall temperature of the planet has risen by 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. This has resulted in large icebergs becoming more common in ocean waters. The glaciers and ice shelves are more prone to developing cracks due to the higher temperatures, and water on the ice's surface makes those cracks wider until they finally reach a breaking point. Additionally, as more ice melts beneath glaciers and ice sheets, icebergs will move faster into the ocean. In 2000, the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica birthed iceberg B15. It measured 159 miles long and was 20 miles wide. In the years that followed, B15 began to shrink and eventually broke up into two smaller pieces. After 23 years, a small piece of it is still floating around the ocean, but back then it was known as the largest iceberg in recorded history. The topic of icebergs became popular and appealing after the sinking of the Titanic. The size of the iceberg that caused one of the most tragic and famous disasters, which was 400 feet long and 100 feet high, doesn't even compare to the biggest icebergs that are floating around the world's oceans. In truth, it was one of the smaller ones. But if a tiny iceberg can rip into a massive ship, it's hard to imagine what a large one would be capable of. That's exactly the reason why we track icebergs today, and it's why forming the International Ice Patrol was so important. It's necessary to provide some level of protection to defend against these occurrences. The most recent iceberg breakoff occurred in January 2023, which is the second breakoff to happen in the area. Measuring a whopping 598 square miles, it's separated from the 492-foot-thick Brunt ice shelf, which is said to be nearly the size of Greater London. The iceberg, named A76A, is currently known as the largest remaining piece of what was once the biggest iceberg floating around in the world's oceans. It broke away from the Ron ice shelf in May 2021 and measured 1,668 square miles. That's much larger than the state of Rhode Island and surpasses the size of Manhattan multiple times. However, it's still only a third the size of the B-15 iceberg. The dimensions were proven via satellite imagery, but just a month after detaching from the ice shelf, it broke down into 3 smaller pieces, known as bergy bits. The breakup of an iceberg typically happens after they reach warmer waters. Iceberg A76A, the largest of the 3 baby bergs, measured an impressive 84 miles long and 16 miles wide. According to reports, A76A is currently floating around the deep waterway known as the Drake Passage. It connects the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans between Cape Horn in South Africa and the South Shetland Islands to the north of the Antarctic Peninsula. According to Earth Observatory, the mighty Antarctic Circumpolar Current drives icebergs east before they're thrown northbound near the equator, where icebergs meet their fate in water that's too warm for them to thrive. 1. Kraken. When you hear about a giant squid, you likely conjure images of old-time sailors being attacked by a massive sea monster. You might imagine huge eyes and impossibly long tentacles ripping a schooner in half with relative ease. And, unfortunately, the truth about these giant creatures is just as terrifying. The scientific community knows little or nothing about the habits of these squids, and so you may be wondering, where did they go? But unfortunately, all researchers really know is what they've heard from tall tales and what they've seen from poor quality pictures. For a long time, scientists have debated whether or not the giant squid is even a real species. The myth goes back to an account from King Sverre of Norway. In this obscure ancient document, Sverre talks about many different sea monsters, with the Kraken being the largest and most terrifying. And thanks to the king's story, the Kraken was immediately placed in Norse mythology. The legend of a massive squid was so widespread that it even made it into the first modern scientific surveys of the natural world in 18th century Europe. The fact that the giant squid is so elusive does nothing to dispute the legends. Up until recently, all scientists could manage to get was a small glimpse of tentacles or a flash of this mysterious creature going by. When the remains of a massive squid were discovered on a Danish coast in 1853, the myth of the Kraken was transformed into reality. Strangely, the enormous squid was just as baffling as the legend that it gave rise to, and we know very little about it because it occupies such a deep underwater habitat. On September 30th, 2004, Tsunami Kubodera with the National Science Museum of Japan and whale watcher Kiyoshi Mori captured the first images of a living giant squid in its natural environment. They dropped a 3,000-foot line baited with squid and shrimp over the side of their 5-ton fishing boat on their third journey to a renowned sperm whale hunting area located 602 miles south of Tokyo. And this was where the amazing photographs of the giant squid were captured. After more than 20 attempts that day, a massive squid measuring 26 feet attacked the bait and its tentacle became caught. Then, in the Gulf of Mexico in 2019, Nathan Robinson, an independent researcher based in Valencia, Spain, caught another glimpse of the legendary species while examining footage from a camera intended for covertly watching deep-sea cephalopods. The video is the most recent to emerge from a camera system that was used to record giant squid in deep seas off the coast of Japan in 2012. Since then, the system has also recorded at least 2 other species of elusive deep-sea squids. The camera's discreet design and specialized bait, which are essential to the observation of these intelligent critters, were detailed by Robinson and his team. The technology has the ability to shed light on the deep ocean secrets, which is our planet's biggest and least studied environment. The Medusa camera, a 3-foot cube weighing more than 200 pounds, is used for surveillance. The inventor of the camera knew that deep-sea cephalopods avoid typical sample techniques like trawling nets and noisy light submersibles due to their intellect and acute eyesight. The stealthy Medusa, on the other hand, glides across the deep without making a sound because it utilizes red light illuminators, which are invisible to deep-sea animals. It also has low-light cameras on board. In order to draw in predators like the giant squid, they attach an electronic bait called an E-jelly to the camera. The natural light that many deep-sea creatures produce from their bodies is known as bioluminescence, and the twirling LED lights of the E-jelly imitate a particular jellyfish species' bioluminescent alarm signal. Deep-sea squids are drawn to the lights, despite the fact that they aren't known to consume jellyfish, because they may potentially make a meal of the alleged aggressor. One video clip provided scientists with important insights into the behavior of giant squids. The footage disproved popular theories that the creatures are immobile predators who wait for prey to approach them. Instead, it showed that the squid stalked the E-jelly before planning its attack. According to Robinson, the fact that it was tracking the electronic bait adds to the evidence that these are animals that actively hunt their prey. At long last, they've proven the existence of these magnificent creatures. Hopefully, in the near future, we'll get to see much more of the amazing creatures and learn more about its habits as technology continues to evolve. Do you think you'd survive being attacked by a giant squid? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.